Of all of the controversies to hit games this year, I don't think any of them were as long written and crazy as the Pokemon problems. And part of me agrees with some of these criticisms. But playing Sword and Shield was roughly what I expected the game to be. The game does have its problems here and there, but it's not all the community seems to be riling it up to be. It's far from a perfect game, but it's not a bad one either. It seems to run the line somewhere in between those two, kind of as if it's a decent game, but it's not great, but it's not too bad either. Right out of the gate, the game starts you off showing off new features, as well as a cutscene. We're introduced to Chairman Rose, and he explains the whole regular World of Pokemon kind of speech that happens at the beginning of most Pokemon games, if not all of them. Now, I don't really have a problem with this, outside of the fact that the entire cutscene has lip syncing, and you can't skip the dialogue, which means it's intended to be called a cutscene, whereas this game seems to call them movies. Why does it not have voice acting? I could understand this if I could skim through the dialogue as fast as I wanted to, because I don't need to hear this speech about the world of Pokemon and the region of Galar. It's unnecessary. And some people will say, yeah, no, voice acting's not that big of a deal, but like, there are scenes in this game that desperately need it. Like, if I can't skip the dialogue, if I can't skip the scene, then it damn better have voice acting, because it's just it's so weird. Especially in 2019, where you have Nintendo publishing fully voiced games like Fire Emblem Three Houses, and other companies publishing nearly almost fully voiced games. In the category of RPGs, even Dragon Quest, a game that's been solely about sticking to tradition, has started doing voice acting for its scenes. This is a little thing that irked me about it, but all things aside, the game starts pretty standard. You get your starter within probably the first 5 to 10 minutes of the game, and it takes off. It's a good step up from Sun and Moon, which took like 30 to 40 minutes, I think, to get your starter. And I didn't finish Ultra Sun or Ultra Moon, because I don't like Sun and Moon. Now, going through this game about 3 times in the past week has been kind of an adventure. I wanted to repeat playthroughs, since that's usually what I do in Pokemon games. Now, this game, playtime-wise, finishes off at about the same playtime as any other Pokemon game, if not even a little bit longer, in my opinion. It all comes down to how much time you spend doing other things. If you just rush the story, turn off animations, and all of that, then obviously it's going to take you maybe 15 hours, and such. And yeah, you could judge a game like that, and that's perfectly fine. But I kind of disagree, since you're removing some of the more interesting details of the game. The move animations are perfectly fine. One of the problems that people seem to put up on Reddit and Twitter is that there are no high-quality animations in the game, which I kind of disagree with, and agree with here and there. The Pokemon are not detailed. They are pretty standard as far as things go, which is understandable. If you have 435 models, and you need to animate each of them separately, then you don't want to make every Pokemon needlessly detailed for battle. Move animations are streamlined, and they happen relatively quick, and that's all that really needs to be there. Now, I guess one problem I do understand that people really didn't like about the game is that some move animations feel very lackluster. As an example, Double Kick, which is just your Pokemon hopping twice instead of actually doing their physical attack animation. Which I understand, but I don't think it's that necessary to have like detailed animations for the Pokemon, because personally for me, Pokemon's always kind of been a game of imagination. You get a general idea of what things look like, and then you kind of just imagine it for yourself. And I understand that doesn't appeal to people as much anymore. That's just the way the series always has been. So I'm just used to it. But I guess people were expecting moves to be more animated and shown better, which is entirely up to them. Now moving on from that, a lot of the trainer animations are actually fairly detailed. You can see a good amount of personality put into each individual gym leader, as each of them use their Dynamax and Gigantamax Pokemon. As an example, one of the gym leaders takes a selfie of himself while the Fire-type gym leader's eyes light up when he uses his Dynamax, and one of the gym leaders almost drops the ball due to how heavy it is. They're little details. It's not anything big, but it's fun to watch since they're so different from each other, and it builds a little bit of personality for each individual leader. Now, for the most part, I've seemed to refute most of the claims that these games are absolutely flawed. But I would like to say that I do agree that sometimes it can feel a little lackluster. The wild area, which is what the first trailer really advertised for this game, is a decent start to something, but it's a little bit hard to put into words how I feel about it. For one, it's an interesting idea. Having numerous Pokemon wander a large open area is actually a pretty interesting idea to implement into a game. However, we have seen open world areas done before, and for the most part, this runs similarly to other open world areas on the Switch. When you're offline, it runs perfectly fine, because the area is not densely populated with trainers moving there. When you go online, the trainers will start to move around, and you'll be able to see other people moving on the overworld. And that's where the game has performance. And yeah, you can say, well, you know, in this area of the game, there are no performance issues for games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade Chronicles 2. But I'd like to point out to you that Xenoblade 2 had a lot of issues running itself. A lot. I played that game for 130 hours. So I've seen it before. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild took place in mostly open fields. And you can compare them all. It's perfectly fine if you want to compare. But you can't really say that these games can stack evenly. Xenoblade wasn't an online game, yet it had issues running because of how many things were loaded and all of that jazz. I don't know the technical stuff about this, and I shouldn't pretend to be a technical expert. You should never act like you know everything just because you read a couple posts some random person posted on Twitter and Reddit. Are these games free to not be criticized? Absolutely not. Voicing your opinion is very important. But I will say, really not as bad as people seem to put it out to be. Now, straying away from presentation for a little while, let's talk about the story. Pokemon has never been a narratively strong game. I don't think there's any game in the mainline series that made me really care about the story. And that's fine. Not every game has to be a masterpiece when it comes to storytelling. Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, and Sun and Moon have their own kind of thing where they had this very linear path of telling a story, and that's understandable. It was a good way to kind of try to branch off, but I don't think it really delivered, because I don't like 7th Gen at all. Now, Sword and Shield has some story, but it's much closer, in my opinion, to something of the earlier titles than something of the more recent ones. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it in that regard. However, some characters kind of have wasted potential, it feels like. Without getting too much into spoilers, some characters are kind of just thrown aside, and there isn't much character development for them, and that's okay, because it's Pokemon, and I really don't expect anything phenomenal from Pokemon story. But at the same time, it feels a little bit disappointing. Also, Hop interrupting you every time you land a critical hit or a super effective hit is kind of irritating. Don't do that unless you're gonna voice the lines. Please. Just don't do that. Now, getting to the gameplay loop, it's Pokemon. If you liked previous games, you're gonna like this one. If you didn't like previous games, you're getting the exact same experience. For the most part. I think Wandering the Worlds is the same as ever. Seeing Pokemon in the overworld is a fantastic addition that they seem to be wanting to continue for the rest of the series, and I think that's a great idea. Mixing it with the rustling grass random encounters is also good. It gives you kind of a variety where you can pick and choose which encounters you want to go into. Moving on to the topic of something like the forced EXP share, which seemed to be a huge thing with the general community. In my opinion, it's not even a problem. If you're not literally catching everything and shoving experience candies into your Pokemon every 5 seconds so that you can overlevel them and then say the game was too easy, then that's entirely your fault. It's like, and some mild gameplay spoilers for Persona 5 here. It's like if I went on merciless difficulty on Persona 5 and went to Mementos during flu season, grinded the Reaper to level 99 in a dungeon with enemies that are below level 55, and said, oh, well, that dungeon was easy because, you know, the game's too easy now. And it's like, no, you literally went and grinded the fuck out of your units, and now you're saying that it's too easy. How does that work? You know? It's like, you know, the story for Pokemon is not about the people with EV-trained Pokemon and all that. If you go do that, that's your choice. You are, in exchange, making the game easier for yourself. If you want to make a Pokemon game harder, then you have to go out of your way to kind of limit yourself on these things. That being said, it really isn't that hard to make a difficulty. Well, I don't know if it's that hard. Make a difficulty slider or something. Difficulty selection for these games. Black and White 2 had it. That's one of the only things I like about that game. Just do it. I had to use a goddamn action replay to get that, because they didn't let you unlock it till you finish the game, which is stupid. Just let me do my game. Make it easy, normal, and hard. And if you really want to, make a competitive difficulty where everyone's Pokemon are EV trained. And then you have, you know, that's difficulty, I guess. I don't really see a reason why not to include that, but it seems like that's what they wanted to do. They didn't want to include anything like that, so they did it. Do it next time. All in all, I really don't think these games are as bad as people are saying. If you don't want to buy it, that's fine. If you have criticisms, that's fine. I'm not saying go and buy this game because it's the best game ever made. It's not. It's a decent game. It's not horrible. You know, you have your little things that I'm not very happy about. You know, lack of voice acting, lack of a difficulty slider. But then you have the things that I'm fine with. The game's fun, the raid battles are fun. You know, it's a fun game, and I don't see a reason why we need to bash the developers who I don't think are really that responsible for these choices. I think if anything, it falls to corporate. Corporate's the big problem with most games. A lot of EA titles, you know, it's the same shit there. Where corporate kind of decides what the fuck they want to do, as far as I've learned, at least. I don't really know for sure, but I'm not just gonna go online and believe everything I see, because that's how you get misinformed. So, it's not a bad game. It's a decent game. It's fun, which is what matters most. It has interesting ideas, and it's a good step forward, in my opinion. I understand the discontent about the dex cut and how the wild area runs. Don't understand the whole thing about the shadows clipping, and the pop-ins happen for other games. Like, everyone seems to compare this game to Dragon Quest XI, which, okay, sure, let's pretend that's exactly the same game, which it's not. But if we're comparing it to Dragon Quest XI, Dragon Quest XI has weird pop-ins too. They don't happen as often as Pokemon just because of how much less quickly you're moving through the open area. That's my guess, at least. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. Honestly, all in all, this is a decent game. It's not my favorite game of 2019, certainly not my least favorite, and it's absolutely not my most disappointing. I like the new Pokemon designs, you know? And if you were expecting this game to be the next Persona 5 or Tales of Berseria or whatever big JRPG, Fire Emblem Three Houses, it never was going to. I mean, come on. I know you can have expectations, but keep them realistic. That's another can of worms about a lot of movies. And stop posting that Game Freak is lazy. Half the time people who are posting are just random Redditors who read some shit that Distant Kingdom spewed out of his ass or something like that. I don't know if these people know what they're talking about. I don't know if I know what I'm talking about either. Because I don't make games, ever. I suck at coding. That shit's hard. Like, you can't just go and believe someone who modeled a random Pokemon like Pikachu and then we're like, hey, we slapped the fucking animation on him. Look, he runs and his tail wags. And it only took us 2 hours, and I'm not gonna give you any proof. And it's like, okay, I guess. People are mad about tail whip animations, they're mad about Dex. Dex is understandable. I could give 2 fucks what tail whip looks like, because who the fuck uses tail whip? That's all. Have a wonderful day. Because I know I'm going to.